process is to prepare the cake. And as you can see, there's a dip in the cake. I don't know what I did to deserve this. That'd be one of the worst sheet pans that I've ever seen. So this is what happens, and I can see what happens. And of course, in order to make this all the pieces flat, then you have to trim this. A little bit back here.
Bless you.
So you want to take a look at it down here and make sure that it's fairly flat, and it's fairly flat. It's not perfect, but I'm going to go with it anyway. So you can use simple syrup on this. So if you wanted to, flavor the cake, help to preserve it a little bit longer, you could just make simple syrup, add a little flavoring to it, and just with your brush, go over the top. The next step would be to get the marzipan ready. So I have some old marzipan here, which I'm trying to soften in some hot water. Did I mention this to you as a possible way? I mean, it's not an ideal situation, but it will save you money. You just have to make sure you dry it off and you don't get any paper in it. And then, of course, you have to go through the kneading process again. We always saved any extra marzipan that we had. So if we ever did this, we'd trim it and we would save that marzipan. We'd clean it off, scrape it off. If you need to, you can wash it off, dry it, and you could reuse it, provided you handle it properly, right? No hands. And I think this is bigger than what we have. Yeah. You guys have how much marzipan?
I think 8 ounces.
Huh?
I think they're 8
You have
ounce
8
balls.
ounces? You're going to see you're not going to need 8 ounces with this. So one thing you got to be careful of is if the marzipan sticks to the table at any point, you need your bench scraper to scrape off where it's stuck. Does somebody have their little duster out with powdered sugar? I can borrow. You need our book? I mean, sometimes you don't need to do it, but it will help to prevent it from sticking. Don't put too much sugar in your duster here. And what I do is I try to roll it out almost the same size as this, maybe a little bit shorter. And press it down, take the pin to it a little bit, and then I want to move it. So just kind of like what you do with pie dough, so it doesn't stick to the bench. You don't spend a lot of time pressing it into the bench without moving it around or turning it. So that should always be a part of this process. Sense of size. We also should be using our own guides. To make sure that this is an 1/8 of an inch thick. Which is okay, next step is to take some preserves, and it doesn't matter what you use. I like to use apricot coating. I don't know if you've used it in your other classes, but it's a solid when you take it out of the can, and then you bring it to the boil. And then you can apply it, and it's really good for sticking things because it doesn't contribute a lot of moisture, and so this will stick very readily to it. The jams and jellies aren't quite as good because if you put too much on, it'll start to dissolve the fondant or the marzipan, and it could then move around. And so we're talking about 1-inch squares moving around. So once you have it like this, you can take one of these cardboards. We're going to flip it over. And the whole purpose of the cardboards is to aid in transferring it or moving it. Okay? You should have a French knife probably. Make this easier. And we're going to cut right next to the piece and trim off the excess marzipan. Okay, and this is the stuff you want to clean off if you get any cake crumbs or preserves on it. You just get a little bit in it. As long as you use this in a relatively short period of time. It's not something you're going to store for a long time, using it in another cake, you know, it's fine. Also, you want to keep this in plastic so it doesn't dry out. Does somebody have a French knife out? Oops, French.
No, on my camera.
The whole cutting process. Thank you. The whole cutting process is upside down. So make sure that your edges are clean. I prefer not to drag the blade because sometimes that pulls. So I like to use a chopping motion when I cut. Okay, and I'm going to measure this into 1-inch bars. So it's easier to use a small knife when you're doing the measuring or marking because it's not heavy, you can handle it more easily. And I just mark one piece. Do the chop, but I didn't go through it all the way with the heel of the blade. Now, when when I cut these, I cut them approximately 3 1/4. 3 3/8 to 3 1/4. And I knew to do that because I measured the sheet to make sure that I would get 3 1-inch bars out of this with a little bit excess. And so there's the 3 1-inch bars. And then you come back here and you measure 1 inch. Cut. You can cut 1 bar at a time. That way you can be a little bit more careful. Anytime you gang cut these, there's always a chance of messing up a lot of pieces at once, pretty quickly. So you should know what you're doing if you start to do this. You can also cut part of the way down with your serrated knife, and then finish the cut with your French knife. Serrated knife cuts tape better. But ultimately, the reason we're doing this upside down is so that we can cut the marzipan while it's sitting against a flat surface, so that it will come out nice and square and flat. And this should take us to 13 pieces. 33. I don't know if I